Welcome to the Mock Me podcast. Today we have a fantastic guest in Vance Crowe. Now, Vance, I was on his podcast last year. He was our speaker at our Constant Canopy Field Day this past summer. He brings forth a wealth of knowledge because, Vance, how many podcasts are you at these days? I mean, it seems like you're doing one every other day. What kind of schedule
I think
are you
I'm
on?
about at 200 podcasts, somewhere around there.
Wow. And it's tough to keep up with all that stuff going on. But man, you, as far as a eclectic group, I mean, you've had them all on. What's one of the most interesting characters you've had on in the last few weeks?
I had a woman on named Ayala Girl, who is a commercial sex worker, like a cam girl on OnlyFans, but she's somewhere on the Asperger's spectrum. And so she's extremely rational and logical. So she's able to have conversations about things that most people would feel is like really emotional or even dangerous. And she's able to almost completely divorce herself from that emotion and be able to talk about it from a logic standpoint. And so it offered me an opportunity to ask her questions that if I were to ask most people, they would either blush or get angry or feel some sense, but I was able to ask her really probing questions and have it just be like a casual dialogue.
It doesn't seem like a profession that her guidance counselor would have steered her towards if she had that emotional connection.
No, she had she came from a really evangelical religious family, and in part I think moved into the world as a rebellion against it, but I think has since embraced an entirely different world than the one of faith and the one of community for a very different relationship with other human beings. It's an interesting person to talk with.
So COVID seems to be slowing down a little bit. Is the world of your public speaking, that kind of stuff, coming back? Have you done any in live person stuff yet?
I've done some like in-person consulting where a lot of times I'm up there talking about an idea in front of a small group of people, like 10 or 15 people. But the big stage stuff, no. And even the people that were like, we're going forward, we've got a venue in Texas and we're going to do it no matter what, like days beforehand, they've pulled out. So I've done a bunch of stuff online, but the in-person stuff has not been quick to come back.
Yeah. So I want to spend as much time today on something that you brought up that I've been fishing around and I didn't even know exactly what they were calling. Is this like intellectual dark web, but game B. And I have been, I got to be honest, I have been taken in over the last 5 days, probably 40 hours, to where my wife is borderline getting closer to divorce just from me taking in so much content. But it's become fascinating, these characters that actually have a podcast and there's dead air because their brains are so engaged in every both sides of the conversation. It's so much better content. But why did you bring that up to me? You had Jim Rutt on last week. Tell the listeners why you told me about it.
So the goal of my podcast is called the Vance Crowe podcast, is to do what I call getting up the graph. What I am really interested in is finding ideas and people and ways of thinking that are coming from a group of people that are studying something deeply, or they're very interested in discovering an answer to something that other people don't agree with, aren't paying attention to, don't like. So I'm always in search of those people. And I generally do it because what I want to know is, what is the inner voice that drives people to make the sort of discoveries that when other people finally come to the conclusion that, oh, there was value to that idea, they can be vindicated in some way. But the vindication is not the most important thing. To me, I love people that are just like pushing their way up that graph to find a subject that very, very few people know about. But if they're correct, the value of it is huge. So that's, how you and I came in contact, several years ago. And it's also how I found this guy named Jim Rutt. So Jim runs a group called Game B, which initially I just kind of had thought of as a Facebook group where there were people that were talking about how they wish they didn't have to play game A and they want to play in this other world, game B. So game A would be the one that we're naturally predisposed to, the one where people live in cities and they go to work and they have transactional relationships. So I need somebody to watch my kids, so I'm going to pay, an employee to do that, and then I'm going to go to work for a set amount of hours, and my goal is to continue moving up the hierarchy at my work to get ever more money in order to be able to hopefully use that money one day to have the freedom that I'm giving up today in order that I can keep moving up this hierarchy. So Jim Rutt is this very weird character. He's been a CEO. He's actually won Game A. He ran a company called Network Solutions and sold it for $15 billion. He was with Thomson Reuters when they were buying 80 companies a year and integrating them, spinning off the worth less parts and keeping the parts that they wanted. And now that he has succeeded, he said, look, I don't think there's as much meaning at the top of Game A as we've been led to believe. And so he got together with some other people. A guy named Jordan Hall comes to mind. And they're working on, is there a way that we could establish a society where we're not playing the game by the same rules that the Game A people are playing, and bring back a lot of those things that we kind of intuitively know we want: community, connection with the earth, status being derived from what do you contribute to the overall community, as opposed to status being derived from, having the hierarchical leadership. And I thought he was an interesting guy. And once we spoke, I realized that a lot of what they were planning on doing, if they are to achieve Game B, is they need to have people involved in agriculture, and they need to have people that are willing to play the agriculture game differently than the Game A agriculture game is played. And when I look out at the world, I think there are a few people playing, I don't know if it's Game B, but they're playing different games than Game A. And you were one of the first people that came to mind. And so I knew, the most valuable thing that I ever do in this world is find one person from up one graph and one person from up a totally different graph, and try and connect them so that we can see what sparks happen once you connect not just the two individuals, but the networks that stand behind those two individuals.
My wife, when I bring up your name, the first thing she talks about is how exciting you get towards no matter what someone does as a profession, and the engagement and the present that you live your life in, which is how you peel the layers of the onions, how you get to the spot that you're trying to get to. But I think the big challenge, I think you brought it up when we talked before, we live in a society now where if I want to go to St. Louis, 92% of people are going to get on Google Maps and hit turn-by-turn directions. They basically outsourced all the, 5 previous generation knowledge, as Jim Rutt talks about. I can still know that it's March 2nd and the sun sets at 6:37 p.m. And if it's at this spot, it's probably like 5:11 in the afternoon, and get within 10, 20 minutes. A lot of people don't have these, I don't know how to explain that, but this inherent knowledge to plug in to systems. And I think the thing that I was wanting to direct this towards is, I think there's a lot of really smart people that are in a different spot in their life than me and you are at. I just turned 40. I think you're a few years behind me. Are you 38, 39?
Yeah, 39.
And, if you're past over the hill and you're closer to 60, you're like, I just need to keep optimizing Game A because, Florida's calling me. I'm sitting on the beach. I'm cashing in. I'm just going to enjoy life. And we're sitting here like, we got another generation to get through. And what's that going to look like, in 2040? It's not going to look like today. And I think a lot of us can agree, whether it's electric vehicles, there's going to be so many technologies, just the whole Uber mindset is going to disrupt everything. And we've got to connect with other people in this mindset. If we just keep on plugging it in Game A, then it's just not going to be there. It's got to be different. But go ahead and give me a break from that thought, what you're thinking as I ramble on here.
I'm so in all the interviewing of people that I've done, that I've really encountered a few ideas that once I heard them, it created a pattern language, right? And I think of pattern languages. If you can name a phenomena that you see all around you but doesn't have a name yet, then you and I can share this knowledge of this thing, and we can stack it into the way that we think about things. And one of the most amazing pattern language ideas that I've heard recently was one about somewhere versus anywhere people. And I was 100% grew up with the mentality of an anywhere person. I was in a small town, and all I could think about was, I got to leave. There's no way that I can achieve here. Like if I win here, I'm king of what? Like, and so to me, there was very little value of being in my small town. And what I wanted to do was go far away. And then basically every single interaction that you have as an anywhere person is transactional. It's, I can pay someone to do the work that I need them to do, or to give me the sorts of things that normally come from community, moving a stove in, fixing something, taking care of somebody's kids. I'm going to be a part of this transactional thing because what it allows me to do is to be cosmopolitan. I can pick up and move anywhere. I can get any access to any type of cuisine I want. I can be living at what I think of as the top of the world. Somewhere people are, kind of put against that by saying, look, I don't need the trappings of the wild world, or to be, seen as being a world traveler or being cosmopolitan. Instead, I stay here because I love the people that are here, or I am connected with family, or we have a responsibility or some sort of business here. And there's not to say that one is right or one is wrong. It's just that the anywhere people grew so much faster than the somewhere people in the last maybe 10, 15, 20 years, that's probably a large reason why we're seeing the social upheaval that we are right now. People moved from being somewhere people like me, to being anywhere people, and then being disconnected and somewhat adrift. And I think that leads me to the idea that, and it kind of goes with the thing that you're saying. Not only are people disconnected with what time of year is it, or how do I get from point A to point B, where is my physical place in this world, but also meaning, right? Because meaning comes from you knowing where you fit in the world. And if it's a transactional world, you can be interchanged very easily. But in a somewhere person world, you can't be replaced very easily.
Well, you hit the nail on the head there. One thing that I think of in game A is exactly what you're saying is, and that's why I say I'm really different, is that I was fortunate enough to come out of a womb of both sides of the family farmed. And you would think that I was this golden child that was going to have all this ground to do whatever I want and grow more corn and beans than anyone else. And what happened was both key pillars of both sides of the family died of cancer at 53. So what I saw happen after that, especially with my, I was kind of reacting to my father, and then my other uncle happened. And then basically the void was filled in with just farmers competing for that land to do the same thing. And all that basically happened was the price to rent the land went up about $50 through the competition. So you start looking at the world as, if I'm not actually contributing something different and increasing the value by connecting people or looking at things differently, then when I leave, my, the void after I leave is just filled in by the same thing. And there's an emptiness there. And, I got to be honest. I mean, I have so much self-confidence, even though I have a lot of a fight in status quo on a daily matter. I was just explaining to Sarah that when I'm in town and I'm kind of doing my own thing, connecting, going places and making relationships, it's like a boost. And then when I go back home, I love everyone, but it's like, why don't you just lay down and do what you're supposed to do? And man, it's what I'm trying to get to is, I don't think that this, humans are beyond an apex predator. And this is something that someone talked about in a podcast I was listening to a few days ago. And people have the ability to invent a new herbicide or make this ginormous fishing net and basically take everything, wreak havoc on the ecosystem, harvest, pollute. And we think that there's this push to harvest all these resources because that's what we've been doing for years and that's what works. But I don't think we're going to be able to do that for a while. So I think what drives me is through meeting people, a thought that I've always had, but as I start reading these books, this plant intelligence things really hits the nail on the head, is basically looking at everything underneath the sun, every living entity, and know that it's intelligent. It wouldn't be on this earth if it wasn't intelligent. And instead of going to that field and worrying about planting your corn 4.5 inches apart and 1 3/4 inch deep and put a squirt of nitrogen on it to have a very minimal increase, we have things like sunlight, we have water, we have the microbiome that we can tack into. We can arrange different entities in different spots and actually use shade and sun and genetic expression and all this stuff. And this is why I'm weird in this past 6-minute outlay of cry here, is that I don't feel like unless I innovate and experiment and do something different and design based on nature, that I've created any value when I leave this world.
I think it's a powerful thing to ask yourself of like, what is it that you want your tombstone to say? And recognizing how long is it, how many generations possibly would ever come and look at your gravestone and take any meaning out of what was written on it at all. There's this old story that I remember reading in, I don't know, college or so, where it was basically like the afterlife is a group of people that are all in some giant room, and you stay there as long as your name is still being used out in the world. And so you could think about this for good or for bad, right? It's like easy to get your name said for a long time. If you're bad, how long do you want to be in that room? And then the minute that the last time somebody's spoken your name, you disappear. And so really, like, the question of legacy starts to really, boil into you. Does it matter what people remember of me when I'm gone, and how many generations is that important to me? Or if I think about that too carefully, does the future interpretation of me matter at all? And I don't know the answer to that. But to the other thing that you were bringing up about being different, Temple Grandin and I, whenever we cross paths, we talk because we have kind of a similar way that our brain works. Certainly not mine with animals, but the way we picture things is very similar. So we have these great conversations. And one time she told me something that is rung in my head, and I think it's important for people like you or other people listening to your podcast that I think are probably trying to do the same thing that you are with the same level of frustration, which is you are never a prophet in your own land. And like when you fully realize that the people that you grew up around, the people that are seeing you every day, it's much harder for them to look at your ideas and say, oh, those are ideas from a different gravity well. I'm going to take those on, and they aren't a threat to the tribe or my own identity or my own way of doing things. And really, like when you start to feel that level, like when I personally start to feel that level of resentment where I'm like, look, the people that are closest to me that should be using my ideas the most aren't, then you really want to stop and think about like, what facet of myself am I showing these people that makes them say, that's Vance's thing, that's not my thing? And is there anything that I can do that can take away the ego that I have in it and allow people to take it up without thinking that they suddenly have become on Team Vance? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you think these years that we're going through right now are maybe some of the heaviest years of your life? Now your life has changed tremendously having a 7-month-old in the house. But I feel like from an eco standpoint, so much as, and maybe it's being a father, I don't know, but it seems like my 33-year-old self, I couldn't stand right now. Do you think you've seen some really drastic change in that perspective?
You mean in how I view myself?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, man. I have a good friend, and we always talk about like if you imagine that and this we're talking about the afterlife again, right? Imagine that the afterlife is just you having to watch you live your life on repeat, but you can't do anything at all about it. And so all you can do is it's just going to start and you just got to watch the whole thing. And then when it gets done, you just start again. And I think about those times in your life when you're like drinking all the time and thinking you're so cool, or like you're dating that person that like you clearly should not be dating, but like you
Mhm.
just can't get yourself over it, or you're being lazy. And you think like, man, that's going to be the worst part of the movie where I like, and it wakes me up to being like, okay, am I acting in the movie the way that I want to watch? Would I be proud of myself? Would it be exciting? Would I be doing things that I would be proud of? Or would I be doing things that if I had to watch, it would be, filling me with dread and shame? Like, oh no, the part when I, started smoking weed all the time is coming back at me and I don't want to watch this.
So some of those toxic relationships, you know, you said, "Oh, she's crazy," but you're not telling the whole story that you were crazy, that you didn't show up, that you got drunk, and it's and I think as you get older, like this previous like 20 minutes here, I'm like extremely vulnerable, and I'm not saying exactly what I want, but I'm saying everything in my heart. And I think as you get older, you just you throw the like the soap opera script away, and I think you're just so much more yourself because you've seen everything play out when you try to push the plinko over to the side. You've seen it come back around, and I think that not only goes on interpersonal relationships, but when you're going out to sell or you're up on stage or anything like that. I think that's what's really changed on my end somewhat. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I've gotten older, I've figured out what is actually meaning versus what was pleasure, and I certainly fall into it all the time of going towards like, oh, this makes turning on this YouTube video and watching this makes me feel good. I do that all the time, but now like having a daughter or building a business or helping your wife's business succeed, like those things are nowhere near as glamorous. But when you achieve one step on that, it's so much more. It's so much more satisfying, and you could break it down on some kind of biochemical level where you say, oh, you get epinephrine and that feels good, and then you get more dopamine and then that feels good. But you could also just say like accomplishing things that you yourself did not think you could accomplish provide meaning to your life.
So are you still breaking anyone's arm? You still staying with the jujitsu?
Yeah, man, I had to stop because of COVID. And then now that they're back open and I have a daughter, it's very hard to justify the 40-minute trip there, then the roll in, and then the 40 minutes back. So I'll get back there. I'm trying to actually get a group of guys to start a gym, but I am not good enough to coach that gym. So I also have to lure in a coach. But I thought jujitsu was one of the great experiences of my life because there's very few things, particularly if you're like a man, right? And you want to go as hard as you can. When you're a boy, there's so many opportunities when you can throw, bales of hay all day, or you can wrestle with your friends at the end of the cornrows, or you can do all of these really aggressive things where you're allowed to go as hard as you want. And then you hit like 18, 19, 20, and suddenly you're thrown into a world where if you go as hard as you like truly desire to go, people will be outraged with you, right? Like if you, and not just like fighting or wrestling, but like arguing with somebody or going after business. Like we're told in so many domains, don't go as hard as you can. And with jujitsu, you get this place where you can explode. You can use as much energy as you want, but if you're not controlled, the other person will just wallop you. So then you have to like, you're learning how to take this pure outpour of emotion and energy and whatever else you have in you, but you have to put it in a controlled manner. And that was really good for me. That kept me grounded. It kept me humble because, you look at this like 150-pound 12-year-old and think like, I'm gonna dominate him, and then you just get walloped. So that kind of stuff was really, really good for me, and I miss it.
Sam's a meat cutter, and he was talking about just accepting where you're at. And if like some 220 pounders laying on you, instead of like struggling and spending all that energy, you just got to relax the muscles, just accept that this is where we're at, and what am I going to do from there? And I think that's a lot of emotional intelligence, and move by move. But okay,
Well,
so
and it informs other things in your life, right? Like when you start to realize it doesn't matter if I grit my teeth and hold my breath as I'm trying to tussle this person, then you can start saying like, that's true with other things too, right? I'm disagreeing with my wife, and me being angry has no bearing on us getting to the other side of this problem. And so you start to be able to observe, where am I exerting energy needlessly? It allows you to be a lot more in control of your mind.
Yeah. How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? But yeah, breaking it down. So you got a 7-month-old. I talked about we're 40. We can't make it to 65. The world's going to be different. I mean, what are you thinking about your 7-month-old growing up? Like what's your biggest concern? What are you focused on the next 5 years? Tell me a little bit. What's Daddy thinking about?
Oh man. I mean, I guess this is a little embarrassing. I'm not thinking about it that much. I've been really fortunate to be so I am a student of human behavior. It's what I care about. It's like everything down. It's why I hated the masks that people put on for coronavirus. And I took a lot of flack for it, but I was like, look, I need to see people's faces because I can read things on those faces that is really important for me to know in order to build a bond with people. Well, I've never had a being that started from whatever the being is when they're born, and they're a completely blank slate, and I know about almost all of the inputs there, so I can watch her for literally hours. I'm the greatest babysitter in the world because I just sit there and all I want to know is like, what if I try this experiment or that experiment? How is she reacting? What sounds is she making? Why can't she make this sound rather than that sound? So I've been probably to the exclusion of my future self, totally wrapped up in this present moment. And I'm really fortunate because my wife is she used to plan like when they're building military, like a fighter jet. How are we going to make it so all the technologies come together and converge at one time so that you have to plan like 13, 15 years out? So my wife's planning for all the future stuff, and I'm right here, right now. And as far as like the political future, I'm a little worried about, the poll that people are saying there are girls that no longer want to be their gender, or there's, what is it like to be a certain race in this culture, or what will it be like in the future? And those things bother me, but almost as an afterthought, almost when the baby has gone to bed and I have too much free time.
So I might be changing gears here a little bit, but how are we going to get more normal people in this world, that aren't hardcore left, hardcore right? I let someone talk and just go on their story about why they need 10 million guns and sit up on a hill, and everyone's going to charge the hill, and they're going to pick people off because they're extreme leftists or rightists. And the media, everything's paid to have your attention, to hold it as long as possible. So the content that the one extreme gets from the other extreme is exactly the opposite, and it just keeps on getting people more outraged, which creates, you see it on Twitter, it's like 60-80% of it is just people just regurgitating the same shit they saw on Fox News or CNN or whatever. And it seems like there's a ton of us that don't really care about the narrative, the story, but it's hard to go and about in the real world without, I feel like I'm a minority because I don't have anyone else to talk to unless I get on something like this.
Yeah, so there's this concept called the Dunbar Number, which is what is the number of social relationships that you can have and keep track of. And then once you get above that number, then you start, seeing people, but you don't really know anything about them, and they become a stranger. And I think that there's been this big push against tribalism. It's like, oh, we don't want to be tribalists. This is bad. We shouldn't do that. But I think that, the thing that actually supersedes Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it goes breathing, participating in the tribe, and then the other things that go with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And that the reason that people care so much about what other people think is if you were ostracized from your tribe in the past, you were gone. Like you had no hope of surviving. That, you know, like maybe you'd have the lone guy that could live up on a mountain in Appalachia, but like not really. You need a community. And that's why I think this Game B and this work that you're doing has real potential if it grows at a slow enough rate. Because what I think Game B is trying to do is it's trying to bring together people that are willing to do the work and that are willing to take a step outside of their status game and move one step closer towards living in a community that fits that Dunbar number, where you can know everybody there. You might know who has problems and who's a pain in the ass and who's really good at fixing things and who's worthwhile to listen to, even though they talk too much or too loud. And that's how you bring it together. And I think the only real way to do it is to get involved in communities. It's actually why I started my online community called the Articulate Ventures Network, was because I really struggled to build that in my, suburban, upper middle class neighborhood. And so I decided, well, I think I'll do it online. I'm going to bring together people and we're going to practice speaking and disagreeing with one another and sharing skills. And I think that that's why you and Jim Rutt are such a good match for Game B.
I think you hit something that hits a nail on the head, growing slow. And I think it's really, that's why it's, I feel like I'm talking to no one when I'm creating concepts that are, don't scale immediately. It isn't everyone's answer. It's contextual. It's based on a bunch of factors that the answer of how you do one thing is based on how something else is. And I found that really interesting is, I was trying to explain to my grandpa what Game B was in a truck loading corn a day ago. And I said, there's that little burg down the road wheeling. And in 1961, I had a grocery store and maybe 150 people lived there. And all these small towns had a little grocery store. And then, we had chickens in the chicken house and we had all this stuff. And I said, I think this is where the future is going to be. And he's just had his whole life has been about horsepower, has been about productivity, efficiency, just these two dimensions. And now people like you and I has a significance calculation of what can I do today? Who can I connect with? What new skill can I learn about? How can I open my mind that's going to change my direction in the future and not just optimize the past thought? Because it really, I honestly think you have to go back. It's probably 1960, 1955 to get a culture similar to what I think is going to be the future, but we're plugging in all the technology, the solar, the cell phones, all the different ways we're going to Uber and Airbnb every single industry.
Yeah, I mean, my one kind of big hesitation with Game B, and I talked to Jim about this, is that the Back to the Earth movement has been tried, or Back to the Land movement has been tried before. And it was tried in the 60s and 70s when people were experimenting with psychedelics and they recognized, hey, the man got us into a war and he turned us into corporate robots. And what we want is to live free and have free love and be supported by music. And so I think that's because people thought, I want the future with a community right now. And the key feature is that you have to leave Game A slowly. You have to take one step out.
To be a parasite on Game A.
Yeah, that's right. Can I keep my Game A going enough and take one step over and learn, am I going to be a gardener in this? Or am I really sure that I want to do the effort required to raise the food that I'm going to use to eat? Because it takes a ton of work. And, one of the reasons that you're so good at being able to do the constant canopy ideas is that you actually care about it, and the labor that goes along with it is not a challenge for you. But for many people, That's not the case. And so if they were
But
to
I can amplify my voice. I mean, now that 19,000 people follow me on Twitter and we got YouTube and we're doing stuff like this, and I can teach and act like, on my show, I said I used to have an imaginary friend in my belly button named Poe, and no one knew about our conversations. And now I feel like my phone is my imaginary friend, but it's being seen. And what would have happened, Woodstock or Back to the Land, if they would have had all this amplified by social media? Do you think it would
I
have
don't
been a lot more disruptive? Because I want to put this thought out here. I got a friend, a college buddy of mine, just moved back from Oregon, and he moved there about 11 years ago. And now, if you follow what's going on in Portland, it's just it's just so liberal. All the drugs are illegal, and it's a place you don't want to raise a family. And I honestly think that a lot of these urban areas there's going to be one after another that turn into Portland, which is what's going to be the main reason why a lot of these people go back to the land, except it's not 1968 anymore. They don't need to garden and use an old Cub Cadet rototiller, and they can plug into teachers, they can plug into YouTube, they can learn things. They got Amazon Prime bringing shit to their door. They got all these technology that is going to make that style of living so much easier and more attractive, especially when you got glue sniffers and people making meth and all this other shit going on around you. I think it's just going to be the natural progression.
Yeah, one of the things about the phone that I think most people didn't, I completely bought into the idea that when we have the internet and I can talk with anybody in the world, then if we decide that we're going to go invade Iraq, I can get on my phone and I can find an Iraqi and I can talk to him and be like, hey, do you want us to invade or no? And then I could do something with that information. But it turns out we can't, right? Like that the amount of attention that you can garner with other people only has so much significance, right? But that the truth of the matter is, like, that doesn't happen that way. The internet is not structured. I don't call up people randomly from another country or around the world. And instead, we're captured by, like, what's going on right now? What's the most exciting thing? What's the craziest thing that's going on, so that way I can get upset about it? And I don't think it would have been any different then than it is now. I think that that social media and being interconnected across the globe had some drawbacks that are massive that nobody accounted for, and that it is an inevitable consequence of being interconnected is way more fighting. So I think we would have just had this fighting that we're having now. It just would have happened earlier.
So we're distracted, basically, somewhat.
Somewhat, yeah.
So a little microcosm of that. We just got a Nintendo Switch with the kids, and we were playing Mario Party last night. And one of our kids was way ahead. He had more coins than everyone. And my wife started this stink that daddy. So every time they would have an option, they would get a stinky mushroom. They would give it to me. And basically she distracted the two kids to where she went off and won Mario Party. And I just kept on getting bombarded by the kids. And I think it was a perfect microcosm to what's happening today, that both sides are so effing distracted that they don't get anything productive done, that we can do all kinds of policies and trade that underneath the table. And it's just like, it seems like that's what it's all about anymore. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I mean, I know a lot of my close friends are not on social media at all. And I mean, like, I would say I have a bit of an addiction to Twitter. In fact, during Sober October this year, that was one of the things I gave up. And it was a lot harder than I thought that it was. But I had one friend that pointed out one time when I was upset that people had some reaction to something I put up on Twitter. And he was like, for some reason you think that you're going to be understood on Twitter, or that it's going to give you back some feeling about, like, validation. And what if you came to the conclusion that there is no validation on Twitter? And that actually, at first it stung, because I knew what he was saying was like, you're being kind of vain with your, desire to be understood there. But then it also really helped me to, like, way more detach myself from it, because I was like, what does winning Twitter look like? Doesn't look like anything.
So I think something really interesting happened to myself in that regard, in that when Trump went on and and we lost like whatever percentage it was, like 3 or 4% of users, and my followers went down 300 or 400, it actually did something inside of me of like, we've been on, this sounds terrible to admit, but like you kind of get a little dopamine that, oh, I'm aping, you see the rise. And when it goes back, I was talking to Zach Smith the other day, and I was like, at a certain point you feel like, okay, Twitter's going to be gone in a year or two anyway. So screw it. I'm just going to say what I want. If I piss people off and they leave, screw it. I'm not going to get that, affirmation, but like, I'm not going to get the people to agree with me. So I'm just going to speak my piece. And if it's almost like a reverse dopamine now that I like when people, unfollow me. I don't know.
Well, I know. So, our mutual friend, Dwayne Faber, I remember when he kind of came to that conclusion too, where he started getting a little bit of like hey, it used to hurt when somebody would unfollow me, but now I know if I've said something that just, purges a whole bunch of people, it means I pushed a button and made that happen. He's like, depending on how you look at it, if you can let your ego go from the follower numbers, then yeah, you can kind of reverse engineer that. But you could become just as addicted to that as anything else.
Yeah. Man, he just rocketed up in a hurry. It was unreal. And he was like and he still is funny, but it was just amazing how quick he was top dog in the ag Twitter world.
Well, humor transcends all things, right? Because it's pattern spotting, and just like your pattern spotting in agriculture, by saying like, hey, I see this thing here and I see this thing here, and if there's a way for me to connect those two things, then I can derive some energy from that. And that's exactly what comedy is. And you never meet a dumb comedian. Comedians are always intelligent. They just aren't intelligent in the orthodox way. And I think that pattern spotting is what you're doing. And it's a craft that if you can teach other people to be confident in the patterns that they think they're seeing, then they'll be willing to try things.
Yeah. So patterns, I lose a lot of people when I talk about the Fibonacci and the golden ratio. That's a pattern. So there's kind of the first, the derivative thought, and there's the thinking analogy, and it's the combination of the two. It's kind of, if someone's funny but it's like smart funny, then people are attracted to that. So you mentioned a few days ago, you wanted me to explain that, or you didn't really understand what I'm talking about. Do you have a specific question, or can I go on about a 1-minute tangent to hopefully address it?
I mean, the thing that's really a struggle for me is the golden ratio drawn around things. It looks like they've just taken a shell looking thing and they put it on top of a picture or on top of a situation, and they're like, see, can't you see it? And I'm like, it looks like you have a golden ratio put over top of a picture. It doesn't mean anything to me.
So basically everything is designed to survive, but it's also designed to thrive. So the environment that we create, or the venue that we create, amplifies the growth or the ability for something to thrive further. So the game B philosophy in agriculture is, instead of overpowering things, instead of having that 1-mile dragnet, or really, fertilizing the shit out of things and killing everything off and just maximizing that one thing, you basically have get in the neuron and the wavelengths of every entity that's involved, that's relative in that space, and you express them and you amplify the thrive scenario in each entity, and then you can start playing off of each other. So when I was on your podcast, I was trying to explain water, and I was trying to explain the wheat fields. What I was trying to say is, okay, I might get 32 inches of rainfall, I might get 42 inches of rainfall, but the water in the spring is a liability, but it's actually an asset later. So how can I take an entity and not get so greedy with it, let it genetically express, and now lower my expectations of this entity, but make the most of the Pareto distribution, which basically allows me to plant less seeds and have more finites for that one entity and amplify its ability to thrive. So then you can start putting things in place like a silvopasture. On a direct message the other day, someone was trying to have the same exact question, like, what the hell does this have to do with anything? So when you take like a big oak tree and you allow it to have tons of space, then it gets it'll grow like 15 feet around. It'll put a big trunk and it's a massive tree. So if you put that same tree in a forest, then it's a little pencil dick, if you will, and then you can put 300 pencil dicks, and it's those 300 pencil dicks doesn't equate to the amount of 5 massive oak trees. So when you're not greedy, you can basically change the solar capture of less entities, and now you can allow enough sun to come down to grow grass. And now that there's grass, you can have ruminants. And now that the ruminants have grass to eat, you can amplify the grass and keep in this sigmoid curve. So it's this ability to see everything in the environment and amplify its ability to thrive, and putting all that in place allows you to basically create this. It's not so much an algorithm. That's what AI is trying to dummy down agriculture to where we can create algorithms and basically do what man can do when we're only thinking linearly. But it's our ability to have the knowledge and plug into the neurons and how everything's interconnected that allows us to be the craftsman that AI can't compete with.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And I mean, like, and it's good to be thinking in terms of what are the ways that I can use human creativity to allow me to discover things that a computer can only discover what you point it to discover, right? And you know, there's kind of the AI dystopian future where the computers decide what they want to discover. But for now, you've got to point computers and coding at a problem, and you're taking what could be a disadvantage, you know, your inability to be able to calculate all factors on all things, and saying, well, why don't I try and figure out how to run a symphony and make them coordinate in a way that they maybe would mimic nature, but actually then gives me the yield that I want it to give me.
Yeah. So one little exercise I had when I was like in 4th grade, we went to one of these like gifted kids conferences, and everyone had to say Zoom. And I've mentioned this on a previous podcast, but the first time we went around, one person would say Zoom, Zoom, Zoom. And it took literally like a minute and a half for it to go around the room. And as we kept practicing, it basically became a wave, and it only took like as fast as I could say Zoom, maybe half a second later. And it's that recognition when you get into the real world of things that we think are really dumb. Like when you're in school, you think like the trash man must be for, you know, unsmart kids, and this industry must be for unsmart kids. And then as you get older, you figure out the people that grew in that field were intelligent and said, okay, we're going to optimize this. And I think that's what's happening in this whole dark web, or whatever we call it, the game B, is you have these people that are basically taking all these industries and figuring out how they're all interconnected, and why aren't we working together for a common theme? Why are we polluting? Why are we, you know, pushing this one entity when this is really interconnected with this?
Yeah, I think the game B, I would distinguish pretty starkly the difference between game B and the intellectual dark web, but I see the parallel in the sense that there are people that are trying to do things that are outside of the mainstream.
Okay. So I want to give the mic to you. I want you to swim like Nirvana in a way that you want to go. What direction you want to go from here, Vance?
You know, last night when you went out on Twitter and you said, hey, I'm going to interview Vance, what question should I ask? And somebody threw up there, ask him the Peter Thiel paradox, but for agriculture. And it's interesting because that actually made me think, because I have Peter Thiel paradoxes in other domains, but not one specifically in agriculture. So I thought about it, you know, because you kind of do live in this world where the Peter Thiel paradox is, what is something you believe that almost no one you know agrees with you on? And the reason that it's such an interesting question is because if you say something that, if I say something that people already agree with me on, then I've failed. And if I say something that you don't agree with me on, now I get myself into a situation where I've got to talk my way through, like, and get you to agree with me, or to try and change your mind. So it's a good challenge in that sense. And it also kind of shows what is the depth of your gravity well. Like, you know, if you're around all the same people that think all the same things, it is really difficult to come up with a Peter Thiel paradox. So when I encounter somebody that's like, I don't know, I don't have any, then you've got to say like, okay, well, who are the 5 people you're spending the most time with, because whoever you're spending time with, that you become the average of those people. And so it was good for me to think about this Peter Thiel paradox for agriculture. Do you have one?
Yeah, I mean, my second guess was John Kempf. One thing that he's talked about quite frequently is that we can feed the world without nitrogen. And there's 35,000 tons of nitrogen in the atmosphere. There's millions of tons in the subsoil. And through design, we can actually be a lot more productive with our food if we distribute it right, if we design with this previous thought in mind. And a lot of people will fight because they're deriving their statistics from some parched area of Wyoming and taking, like 40 million acres of grass that is not rotationally grazed, that doesn't have precipitation. And they're not saying, okay, if we kicked out this 200 bushel corn in Iowa, that now ethanol is not viable, and we have this ridiculously awesome soil, what could we do with it if we didn't grow corn and soybeans? And not only that, we've got areas around my world, it's central around high population centers that could create markets. And I think that is going to be our reality. I'm not going to say, I've written a lot of articles about $10 corn, $20 corn, hyperinflation, and what's going to happen to oil. I think there's going to be some radical things that happen in the next 10 or 20 years where we're going to find these people that have somewhat of these past generational skill set, and they're going to be asked, okay, that crazy shit you were talking about, I need to know more about it. But I think we can feed people without
that's
all
a
this
damn
stuff.
good one. As soon as you said it, like, that's you can always tell, like, if somebody starts off right, because as soon as you said, I think we can feed the world without nitrogen, I'm like, but that's exactly the right way to go, right? That's the finding something. And having the paradox itself is not necessarily all that, it doesn't make you right, but it does push you to say, what are the things that I am just assuming to be true, and where can we push on them? And I think that's an excellent one.
Now the problem is that I'm not saying I can do it all with plants. I need animals to rotationally graze in between there. I need to think about my solar angles and stuff like that. So, part of the reason why I bought a meat company was not only create a community, a way that I can feed the community, but it is a way to be in this space that I think is part of our survival. I am a big Alan Savory believer that we have to have our livestock impact for this world to go around. And I think it's maybe one of the biggest threats to our society is this idea that we're going to get all our protein in a test tube or plant-based, because it's not, you got to have a closed loop to make it all work. Birds and bees.
I think that's a good one, man. You're onto something there.
So what's yours? Like, what space or industry that you have the most wild ass idea that you double down?
So if I were to answer it in agriculture, I'm the one that I know the best is, I think that the activists were one of the best things that happened to Monsanto. And actually, really, the major 6 ag companies before their consolidation, one of the best things that ever happened to them was the wild increase in activists. And the reason I think this is, every time the activists came on and said, we don't want GMOs or we don't want these chemicals, the ag companies would say, well, that's not reasonable. We can't do that. What we should do instead is let's add some regulations in here. Let's add some testing. Let's add a few more years. Let's add some paperwork that you've got to do, some filing that you've got to do. And every time they added more regulations, the moat to be able to get across, to be able to sell in that industry using technology that people wanted, got wider, which meant that ultimately the very thing that the activists were trying to prevent, which was having these giant megalopolis companies that are dominating the seed industry, is exactly what they got. Then it became so cost prohibitive to enter the market and to bring technologies that might make a tiny change instead of a radical change. Now, the only way you're going to be able to get through all the regulatory work is to actually have some chemical or some formulation or some genetic modification that's going to bring you back billions of dollars. So they're always trying to add these bigger and bigger things because of the very activists that are trying to stop them, to say, no, 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 we don't want.
So you're saying it was
changes.
the best thing to happen for Bayer?
For the shareholders and the owners of the company, right? Because they had a 15-year span where there were no new entrants to the market. Nobody came in. And still, even today, with 4 companies, it's very unlikely you're going to see new companies come in, because the only way that they can get their technology, particularly if it's small, it's just going to be a tiny change, to market, is to sell it to the large companies who are sitting on the other side of the regulation moat.
Mm-hmm. This is happening very quickly in my world. I can't get too much into the details, but basically a lot of competitors are getting swallowed up by the big dog, and they're really stretching or arm wrestling to cut into margins and really eat the little guy's lunch very quickly. And,
regulation creates consolidation, right? It's because the only people that can play the regulation games are the ones that have big enough margins to pay some bureaucrat to sit there and fill out all the forms and do all the jumping through hoops and have the person give the special blessing over whatever it is that you're working on.
So I think there's just going to be 2 different kinds of farmers in 6 years. There's going to be the, I don't know, there's going to be 20,000, 40,000, 60,000 acre farms that are pretty much corporate. Everything's, I don't want to go down that tangent. I don't mean to piss people off. But the reality is, if let's say, Vance, I said, hey, give me $5 and I will guarantee you $150. Would you take that bet?
Coming from you, yes.
So that's exactly what I did this year. So corn rose to a guarantee. I don't know the numbers exactly, somewhere around 450, and it was a lot lower this year. So our APH is 190 something, and we were guaranteed another $150 per acre for a $5 additional premium price, which is 75% subsidized by the U.S. government. So what does that do to the price of nitrogen, the price of seed, the price of P&K, the price of rent, the price of everything else? I mean, if you're the competitive type A guy, then you're going to double down and try to get every waking piece of land possible. And the people that say, oh, it'll come back, are just going to have their lunch ate, and they're not going to have lunch to eat next year. And it's what we really saw in 2010, 2011 area, right when I came to farming. But I think it's going to be nuts in the next few years. I'm just
there's too much money chasing after too few goods, right? And land is one of the reasons the price seems to always go up, is because there's not going to be more of it, but there's a lot more dollars going around. So if you don't have a way to generate more dollars or get more dollars that are available to you, then the value of land stays the same, but the price of it goes up. And that's inflation. It's a scary thing.
So I'm sitting here bickering. I'm a farmer. I'm a hypocrite. I don't like it, but I participate in it. What do you hear from your urban people that you connect with? Does anyone vent about this? What have you heard, good, bad, whatever, how this is all structured?
I think Stephen Ellis, who's a guy on Twitter, the Hedge Whisperer, had a really important thing that I think you've tapped into, which is, in all of his restaurant experience, he's come to the conclusion that people don't care about organic. What they want is local. And really, I think a lot of that has to do with exactly what we talked about at the beginning of this. We have a natural pull to be somewhere people, or to have meaning in the things that we eat and the things that we're connected with. And so the choice that I think people have to make, if they don't want to be in the game A ag movement, which I have no preference on here, right? Like you can do whatever is right for you, but that the only way that you're going to free yourself of it is if you find a way to be a local niche and you give people a way to say, I'm on that guy's team. Because the people living in the urban environment, they want to be on somebody's team because they don't have teams in other places. And this is really deeply valuable. This is something they will pay massive amounts of money for, and not all of them. And you've got to do marketing and you've got to build relationships, and it's going to take time. But this concept of knowing your farmer is only going to accelerate. I don't see that backing off anytime soon.
So I'm gonna ask you a random question. If you didn't do what you did, where you're, doing your podcast, you're talking, you're connecting people. Like, if you had to do a craft, if you had to do a trade, if we had to turn back time a little bit, what would Vance Crowe be doing to survive?
When I was in the Peace Corps, the way that I made friends with a guy in the village that I lived in, I was totally alone. They'd never even seen a white person in their community before, and I was the first one. I started working with this guy named Moses who was making furniture, and I really enjoyed that. And it wasn't because I was any good at it. I was terrible, and I think I really frustrated Moses with how much I broke and how long I would take to do everything. But I worked with him because I thought it was a good relationship. And one of the things that I really liked about building furniture is the pace at which it moves, and then you drop it off and you leave it in a place, and then every time you walk past that place, like they ate dinner on that table I made them, and or there's somebody laying in that cradle that I made. And that's like a feeling of being in your community that's really, really powerful. And I had that experience when working construction, but I think there was something deeper when it was furniture.
So speaking of that thought, I put a tweet, I don't know if you saw it, like 3 years ago, where my tulips are just coming up. When the first warm days of the winter come, like your daylilies, your hostas, all your perennials are like, remember me, I'm coming back. And my entire 20s, I designed landscapes. I planted tulip bulbs everywhere. I have all these perennials. And when I drive to town, I had all these accounts. I used to manage hundreds of acres of all this stuff. And that's cool to me. It's the same senses that you feel like you said, they're eating dinner at that table. And I think that's what I am gravitating towards, is this thought of, okay, I have a bare field. If I die and some other guy doesn't come in and grow corn on it, which he will anyway, but let's just imagine for a second that the farmers can sit there with duct tape around their wrists and just watch the field evolve. It's just going to grow into this gourd of weeds that the birds eventually take enough shits on it that the bird, if trees grow in there, and maybe 10 years now there's something out there, mulberries and stuff. But if I can design perennials, and going back to that really thought earlier where we design on natural expression and how everything's interconnected, then I can go, and that piece of land is going to propagate itself. It's going to drop nuts. It's going to be in a design where I have different species that ring the bell of different nutrient needs and have animals in there. And that's the space that I am ultra excited about. We're actually looking at a property right now and plugging in these people that I'm talking to, like John Kemp, Mark Shepard, these people that can have 5 or 10 years thought process into the design. But that is a really, really strong point, I think, of that furniture thought of what happens. Don't you think that's, it's kind of why we're doing content now. You see yourself live on. If I die, people can still look at my Twitter handle. You got to show up and do stuff.
Well, it's made for me, the conversations allow me to share whoever I am with my daughter. And if something were to happen to me, she can come back and know a lot of the people that I was friends with, or hear me disagreeing with somebody. And to me, that's really important. I have to go in just a second, but I thought of something that I wanted to. I would normally share this with you offline because I think it's kind of personal. But I think that you have a lot of people that are doing what you're doing, and I think it's really important. You asked me about what's going on in the urban environments, and I mentioned how much people want to do the local thing and they want to do the support a farmer and have that connection, there's also a grave, very serious danger around people celebrating and venerating the farmer. And that is that the people living in the city have no idea who is a charlatan and who is not, and who is a really compelling farmer that talks about what they're doing, and who is somebody that is building something slowly over time. And I believe that we have a very real risk of a Pied Piper of sorts coming in and saying, people of the city, look at what they're doing out in the countryside. We shouldn't allow this. We should take their land. We should do it the right way. We should, stomp out the old systems, and suddenly a new one will grow in its place. And this is not a small thing. This has been done in Russia. It's been done in China, and people get this sort of, the same sensation that they do around collective psychoses, right? Where we have the Salem witch trials, and people like you that are charismatic and that are excited and that are doing things, like, you have to temper what you're sharing with people in the city and temper their expectations, because they don't have any idea how slowly you're moving towards this. And the potential danger is people dying in mass to the tunes of tens of millions of people. And so I'm always like, I am the biggest fan of you. I want to see you succeed. But I'm also a little afraid of you, because I am afraid that people will get so excited about what you're doing and not be tempered, and those wheels can bring off the whole thing. And so anyway, I wanted to bring that up with you and with.
So let's talk about the reality of that, because you go in town and everyone's like, well, they're going to come out and take my guns. Who the hell is going to take their guns? Is the hard left in their skinny jeans? Nothing against people who wear skinny jeans. I had one mistakenly, but are they going to come out and take your guns? Like, do you think we'll get to that place where who the hell's going to farm? Like, let's say I share my ideas and it's great. Well, who the hell's going to be able to pull that off? It has to grow slow.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people won't actually wait around for that answer. So if you go look at what happened in Soviet Russian, there were the kulaks, who, I don't know how familiar you are with this story, but basically the Ukrainian farmers, the breadbasket of the Ukraine. Those people had just left the peasantry system, where they were basically serfs on the land, and they had just started a form of capitalism. And so there were the kulaks, were the farmers that had like one cow, and maybe their house was made out of brick instead of timber or something like that. And people went around into communities and said, see those people over there? The reason they have that land is because they stole it, or the reason they have that is because they've always been rich. Let's go take it from them. And in that format, it was literally mobs of people going out and doing that to some extent, but only enough to when they legalized it. And then you started having the government start doing it. And you can say, well, I don't see that happening. It would be very difficult for it to happen. But human psychosis does happen. And we would be fools to say it can't happen here, because when it does happen, it happens quickly. And a good friend of mine asked me a question. He said, if the federal government came out and said, we demand to know not only do you have any guns, but how many do you have and where are they located in your house? And if you don't tell us and we find out that you have them, you've now committed a felony and we can take you to prison. We won't, but we can. Would you sign up for that? And my answer is, yeah, probably. I don't want to go to prison. I don't want to be in a position. And those things happen fast. And so I'm not saying that I think we're in imminent danger of having mobs of people roving around and trying to take over farmland. But I am saying people will believe that they're doing the right thing, and they'll advocate for policies, and they will give people in authority the righteous backing to take action that seems absolutely preposterous to us right now.
Okay. I think it's interesting that you were compelled to bring that up.
Like, you're very charismatic. You must be careful with it, right? It's a weapon to be wielded, or a tool.
What's
to
the
be
weapon?
Used. I mean, like, think about the people I mean, have you met very many people that have read a Peter Singer book? I mean, like I could name, any number of books. Like they read these things and they say, this guy told me that it is completely unethical to keep animals and that it is my righteous responsibility to go do something about this. And people are called to that action. I mean, ideas are what drive people to doing what they're doing. And you yourself are talking about, like, I want to get people excited about this. I want to get them going. And I think you have very good motives, but you wouldn't have to be tempted. Anyone could be tempted into, hey, I just figured out that I can rile this group up and point them at those people. And now that power has been hugely amplified, not just to you, but I think there are a lot of people that are your listeners that are probably also equally getting people excited about ideas, and it can burn out of control quickly.
Well, I get what you're saying, but geez, I got a long way to go. I'm trying to.
If I could just hold the ring just for a moment.
I told Nick today we were leaving a property we're looking at, and I was like, I just want to wake up and do what I want to do and eat a ham sandwich. That's pretty much it. I don't want to have that gland to take over anything or be ahead of a movement. I just want to do what I want to do. So anyway, I'll let you get to what you got to do. Sorry, we had some trouble getting all our tech together, but I think we had a great conversation.
Yeah, man, this is fun.
Yeah. I'll put a little pressure on you since you're on the mic and in the camera. Are you going to come to the field day this year? June 25th?
Is 25th of June?
Yeah.
Yeah, let me see. I'd love to. I'll see if I can round up a group of people. We came in a little posse last time. It was a lot of fun. We'll see what we can do this time.
Heck yeah. We'll see how many green bins we can get into. All right. Well, you have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, we done? Good, man.
We're done.
All right.